Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine for a moment that your deepest emotional patterns, the way you react, the things you fear, maybe desires you suppress, imagine they aren't just quirks,
Right.
but they're actually the very architecture of your vulnerability.
hmm
And what if mastering these hidden dynamics was the key to wielding immense influence over others?
That's a chilling thought.
It really is. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into some truly unsettling yet, I think, profoundly insightful territory. This isn't just about understanding human nature. It feels more like a stark warning.
Absolutely. What's fascinating and maybe a bit disturbing is how two quite profound thinkers, Arthur Schopenhauer and Robert Greene, they sort of converge on this truth that emotional rigidity isn't just a personality trait.
Okay?
It's more like a self-imposed prison,
Yeah.
and one that can be expertly exploited by those who understand it.
Wow.
So this deep dive, it's really about laying bare these forces, not necessarily so you can use them, but critically, so you can recognize them at play, maybe even in your own life.
That's exactly right. Our mission today is to pull back the curtain on these psychological strategies. We've gathered insights that really illuminate the mechanics of emotional influence. And they reveal why our own predictability can be our greatest weakness and why, on the flip side, emotional flexibility can be a truly formidable weapon, sometimes an unsettling one.
Definitely unsettling.
So get ready, because this conversation, I think, is going to make you rethink a lot about connection and, frankly, control. Let's start with what we're calling emotional rigidity. It sounds like something we should actively avoid, right? But how exactly would you define it for us?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, think of it as a symptom. Schopenhauer talked about this blind, unconscious, almost irrational will operating beneath the surface.
The will. Oh.
Yeah, like this primal, gut-level drive, almost an emotional operating system running in the background that we're not really aware of. Rigidity then manifests as this profound lack of adaptability.
So not being able to roll with the punches emotionally.
Exactly. The inability to adjust or bend or even just reinterpret emotional realities, no matter how much things change around you. Think of the person who always reacts with anger.
Right. Default setting.
Default setting, even when being calm would be way more helpful.
Right.
Or, the person who just cannot bring themselves to trust, even after years of loyalty from people. It's this deep-seated resistance to fluidity, to change.
So if emotional rigidity means this lack of adaptability, does that automatically make someone predictable and, I guess, vulnerable because of it?
Precisely. That's where Greene really comes in. He highlights that people aren't primarily governed by, cool reason or logic.
No, definitely not.
No. It's much more about raw emotions, deep-seated insecurities. So the rigid person, they cling desperately to what they know, right, to their established patterns, even if those patterns are clearly harmful or self-sabotaging.
Even if it hurts them.
Even if it hurts them. And this isn't strength, despite maybe how it looks sometimes. This is actually a profound fragility. Surprisingly fragile.
Sure.
The material warns that they're like brittle things. They can shatter under the right kind of pressure because they just lack that internal elasticity to withstand it.
Which raises a scary question.
It does. If your responses are predictable, like right down to the core emotional reaction, well, how easily can your actions be anticipated? And ultimately, how easily can your responses be controlled by someone else?
Yeah, that's a terrifying thought. The idea that someone could just map you out like that.
It is.
But how does someone get so rigid in the first place?
Yeah.
Our sources seem to hint at childhood influences. No surprise there, I suppose.
Yeah, the exploration suggests that from really early on childhood, we're often, trained almost to repress certain emotions.
That's right.
In a way, yeah. Not necessarily because the emotions themselves are dangerous, but because they're inconvenient to others, to adults trying to maintain order or peace or whatever.
Right, like don't cry, don't be angry.
Exactly. A child who's consistently told not to cry or not to show anger or maybe even not to dream too big, they grow up internalizing this belief that these very human emotions are somehow wrong, unacceptable.
Yeah, that sticks.
That sticks deep. This constant internal suppression, Schopenhauer argued, it's like the will turning inward on itself. It becomes this continuous, quiet torment that can last a lifetime, shaping behavior without you even consciously realizing it.
And this leads directly to what the material calls emotional obedience, where people basically adopt roles for others.
Yeah.
The dutiful daughter, the always agreeable employee, the stereotypical nice guy. But the suggestion is These aren't real personalities, are they? It's like wearing a costume.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're described vividly as masks welded to the face.
Wow. Welded.
Welded,
Yeah.
fused on through years of, frankly, self-betrayal, denying one's authentic feelings. And beneath every compliant, agreeable person, these insights assert there's this wild, unexpressed self. A whole reservoir of dormant emotions, desires, ambitions that have just been systematically shut down. Think about maybe the online persona someone curates just to get likes, even if it feels totally fake inside.
Yeah, or the employee who just nods along with the boss,
Yeah.
biting their tongue.
Precisely. And here's where the strategy becomes incredibly potent and honestly incredibly dangerous. This seducer, the influencer figure, they tap directly into that repressed wildness.
Oh.
They offer a kind of forbidden permission to feel what's been buried for so long. They mirror this secret self, this hidden part of the person. And that creates this profound, almost dizzying sense of liberating relief.
I can see how that would feel amazing.
It feels amazing. And alarmingly, it can be mistaken for genuine love, or maybe even destiny, like this person finally sees the real me.
And this next concept takes this into, well, fascinating and frankly, quite unsettling territory. Because this release, this feeling of liberation, it breeds an almost insatiable obsession.
Yep.
It's about providing the outlet, the release valve, but then maintaining absolute control over the supply, like a drug dealer.
It's exactly like that model. The warning is, you must never give too much. Always stay slightly beyond reach.
Why? What does that do?
It's a chillingly effective strategy. That initial permission, that taste of freedom, it creates an intense craving. And by then controlling access to that emotional release, you cultivate this deep dependency.
Aha, okay.
The rigid person, they're not used to this kind of internal freedom, right? So they become fixated on you as the source of it, binding themselves to you in a cycle that is anything but healthy,
They're drawn in by the promise of freedom.
only to find themselves more deeply ensnared than ever before. It's quite insidious.
This leads us to another really unnerving insight from the material. The idea that humans often prefer familiar pain over unfamiliar pleasure. What does that even mean for our emotional patterns and our vulnerability?
This connects directly to what Schopenhauer called the sort of circular suffering of life. Our sources state pretty bluntly that people often don't really change because they're suffering, no matter how agonizing it might feel. It's familiar.
It's known.
It's known. It gives them a twisted kind of identity, a narrative they understand. So you see patterns like a woman raised in a chaotic household, maybe unconsciously seeking out chaotic relationships again and again.
Right. Or the man taught never to cry, who then subtly shames others for showing emotion.
Exactly. These aren't just surface habits. They're described as deep-seated emotional addictions, incredibly hard to break free from. It's like our emotional GPS got set way back when, and we just keep driving down the same roads, even if they lead off a cliff.
So the strategy here, the manipulative one, is to use this familiarity. To mirror their wounds, speak their specific emotional dialect.
Yes. Creating what's called an illusion of fate, making it seem like, oh, we're the same, or I understand you like no one else ever has. It builds this incredibly strong but false sense of connection.
Okay, that sounds incredibly manipulative already. But then,
And this is crucial, once that initial familiarity has forged the bond, you deliberately break the cycle.
ow.
You offer something genuinely new, something contrasting. Maybe stability to the person used to chaos, or perhaps a little bit of controlled chaos to someone who's overly predictable and bored.
The contrast.
Yes. This deliberate contrast creates a profound dependency. Why? Because the emotionally rigid person simply cannot adapt quickly enough to the shifting emotional landscape you've just
Yeah,
introduced.
they're destabilized.
Completely. So they cling to you as their sole source of regulation, their anchor in this increasingly disorienting world you've created for them.
And this connects directly to what the material calls behavioral loops. The idea that we're basically prisoners of our prior emotional conditioning, repeating choices, repeating mistakes, not because we're cursed, but because we're guided by this internal compass that got set way back in childhood. So what does this all mean for someone wanting to exert influence? Or maybe just for us trying to understand these dynamics?
Well, Schopenhauer famously noted that man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. Meaning our deepest impulses, our desires, they often arise from hidden, unconscious places we don't fully control. Green really builds on this, asserting that if you understand someone's emotional history, You can predict their future actions with unnerving accuracy.
Like what?
For example, a person terrified of abandonment will predictably overcommit in relationships. Someone craving validation will consistently overshare information to get approval.
Okay, I see.
The warning here, the really stark warning, is that these deeply ingrained loops can be triggered with precision by someone who understands them, making the influencer appear not as a manipulator,
But as a savior.
tragically, yes, as a true liberator from the very patterns they are actually exploiting.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. If rigidity is the weakness, the vulnerability, then what's the counter strategy? Our deep dive points towards emotional flexibility as the supreme advantage. And again, just to be clear, we're dissecting these strategies to understand them.
Absolutely. Not to endorse.
Not to endorse, but knowing how they work is the first step in recognizing them out there in the world.
Indeed. And Schopenhauer saw freedom not really in external conditions, but in mastering one's own inner impulses, one's reactions. Green expands on this dramatically. He states that true power lies in this ability to adapt, to seamlessly shift masks, to become precisely what the moment demands.
That sounds exhausting.
It probably is, but the advice is stark. Don't be yourself. Be the version of yourself that gets the result.
Wow, don't be yourself. That's pretty cold.
It's a brutal lesson in strategic self-presentation. It's completely devoid of genuine authenticity, but presented as highly effective in this specific context of influence.
So how does this flexibility then get weaponized against someone who is rigid?
By embodying pure contrast, it's almost mathematical. If they are cold and withdrawn, you become warmth and engagement. If they are controlling, you become wonderfully, frustratingly unpredictable.
You keep them off balance.
Completely off balance. If they are withdrawn, you are intensely present, then suddenly distant. Their inherent rigidity, their need for patterns, leaves them blind to the unfamiliar, and thus, ironically, irresistibly drawn to it.
Like a moth to a flame.
Exactly. Your emotional flexibility becomes this intoxicating mystery, this dance they simply cannot figure out or anticipate, and that is how you control the frame. They are forced to constantly adjust to your unpredictable shifts, becoming more pliable, more dependent with each adaptation they make.
This raises a really important point. The material talks about empathy as a weapon, which is jarring because most people think of empathy as a positive trait, right?
It is, and that's what makes its use here so disturbing. Emotional flexibility in this context requires the capacity to deeply sense what others feel, to have empathy, but crucially, not to be controlled or swayed by those emotions yourself.
So you feel it, but you don't absorb it.
Precisely. You enter their emotional world not to comfort or heal, but to meticulously map their vulnerabilities, their triggers, their hidden desires. Then, you strategically reassert your independence. You create a deliberate emotional distance.
And how does the rigid person react to that withdrawal?
They experience this calculated withdrawal as a profound abandonment, a deep wound. So they chase. They confess things they never thought they would. They bind themselves to this desperate hope that you and only you hold the key to unlock them.
That sounds like.
It's exactly how cult leaders operate, or toxic lovers. They make themselves the perceived missing piece in someone else's incomplete psyche. But there's also a stark caution in the material for the influencer, too.
What's that?
If you get emotionally entangled, if you lose that cool, detached perspective, you lose your vantage point. And with it, you lose your power. You become just as vulnerable.
Okay, this is truly a deep dive into the darker side of human interaction. This thinking goes even further, suggesting the flexible person can actually rewrite the narrative of identity. What does that mean?
Well, the idea is that most people live inside these borrowed, often quite rigid stories about who they are, narratives they got from parents, from culture, from past traumas.
Stories that limit them?
Exactly, predictable, confining stories. The flexible person, however, views identity itself as more malleable, maybe even just a fiction. So they offer the target a captivating new narrative.
A better story.
A story where the other person is suddenly powerful, desired, maybe even a little dangerous, truly free. And the target follows not necessarily out of trust in the influencer, but because they desperately want to become that magnificent version of themselves that the influencer is reflecting back at them.
So it's not love they feel.
The material states clearly this leads not to love, but to something far more binding and far more strategic: devotion.
Wow. And to maintain this devotion, this control, you have to keep shifting.
Constantly. You must evolve, confound, surprise. Be soft one day, fiercely independent and distant the next. This deliberate unpredictability destabilizes the rigid mind, which just craves certainty and patterns. The material calls the flexible person a pattern interrupt.
A pattern interrupt. I like that.
And the ultimate form of this mastery, it's called becoming the storm.
Becoming the storm. That sounds dramatic.
It is. It's presented as the ultimate force of disruption. It's a form of seduction, but not built on flattery or empty promises. It's built on sheer subversion and calculated emotional volatility.
How does that work?
You strategically inject unpredictability. You create this turbulent emotional environment around them. Then you offer brief, tantalizing moments of clarity or comfort. You oscillate deliberately between extreme distance and intense intimacy.
Keeping them completely hooked and confused.
Exactly. The strategy literally says you stir their inner oceans until they lose balance, then offer them a raft. It's a precise act of disorienting someone and then positioning yourself as their only hope for stability.
And this is truly fascinating. The concept of the mirror of the forbidden self. What's that about?
This is maybe the pinnacle of the manipulative strategy. It's about reflecting back to the target the parts of themselves they've long buried and felt ashamed of.
Like what parts?
Primal lust, maybe? Raw power, unbridled ambition, deep emotional hunger, things that most people repress because society tells them they're dangerous or morally wrong.
Okay.
But when you, the influencer, embody those very traits without a shred of guilt or hesitation, it awakens their secret, forbidden fascination. Schopenhauer saw art as a mirror that releases us from the will's tyranny.
Right.
Well, here, the seducer is that mirror, only much darker. You become the living embodiment of the person they are not allowed to be. And this triggers an intense, almost unbearable obsession.
So they don't just want you.
They don't just want you, they want to become you. Or rather, they want to become the powerful, liberated version of themselves that you seem to represent. This is called the absolute apex of power in this framework.
And the end goal here is described as emotional possession without attachment. That sounds chilling. Remaining fluid, elusive, yet completely occupying their imagination. It sounds like total psychological submission.
That's essentially what it is. Every calculated withdrawal you make becomes a profound rupture in their world. Every reappearance feels like salvation, a desperate rescue.
You control their whole reality.
They construct these elaborate emotional narratives around your absence. They obsessively assign meaning to every gesture, every look, every hint you give. You don't just influence them anymore, you become their internal climate. You control their emotional weather.
And their rigidity helps this.
Their inherent rigidity ensures they will never truly understand you. They can't grasp your motivations, your ever-shifting nature. And this perpetual failure to categorize you, to pin you down, leads directly to profound psychological submission. This jarring contrast, your fluidity, their rigidity, it breeds both intense admiration and crushing dependency.
So what does this all mean for this seducer, let's call them, at the absolute height of their influence? The material mentions a truly audacious final strategy, controlled self-destruction.
Yeah, it's described as the ultimate power move, almost theatrical. At the absolute peak of their obsession, when they're most deeply entangled and dependent on you, you disappear.
Just, no.
Gone. But it's done with cold precision, not out of any personal emotion or burnout. The strategy advises, quite chillingly, let absence do the final work. You leave them suspended in that state of intense, unfulfilled desire, forever longing.
And when you return, if you return.
If you choose to return, the advice is to be subtly changed, maybe a bit colder, sharper, more mysterious than before. The myth lives on, perpetuated by your calculated absence and transformation.
This really highlights a core Schopenhauerian truth, doesn't it?
It does. The idea that everything is driven by an underlying sense of lack, of wanting, fulfillment, complete satisfaction. Paradoxically, it kills seduction. It ends the game.
So the master manipulator knows when to leave.
The emotionally flexible seducer knows exactly how to exit before satisfaction ever sets in, leaving the story unfinished, the desire unquenched. You essentially make them dream the ending forever, forever tied to the ghost of what you represented.
Wow. That's That was a really deep dive into some truly powerful and, frankly, quite dangerous psychological strategies. We've explored how emotional rigidity can be this self-imposed prison, how suppressed emotions create these profound vulnerabilities, and how a mastery of emotional flexibility, that adaptability, can be used to influence and maybe even command others in some really unsettling ways.
Yeah, and I think the key takeaway here isn't necessarily to go out and wield these tools yourself. Please don't.
Definitely not the goal.
No. The goal is to be able to recognize them, to understand the subtle, often manipulative dances of power and influence that happen all around us. In personal relationships, definitely. In professional settings, absolutely. Even in broader societal dynamics.
So it raises a really important question for everyone listening.
It does. Given everything we've just discussed, how might you identify these patterns in your own life? Those moments where maybe your own emotional predictability makes you vulnerable, or where you sense someone else might be subtly trying to control your emotional landscape. And what does recognizing that mean for your own sense of emotional freedom and ultimately self-protection?
It's such a powerful warning about the hidden levers of human behavior. So as you go about your day, maybe just consider, in what ways might your own emotional predictability make you vulnerable? And what might it mean for you to cultivate your own emotional flexibility? Not to control others, obviously, but to truly understand and navigate the unpredictable storm of human connection for your own strength and your own autonomy.
Definitely something to mull over.
A lot to mull over.